From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, Hayley.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I guess we should introduce ourselves and be professional. My name is Peter Kelly, and I am one of the co-hosts for the UK Psych Health and Safety Podcast. And with me today is...
I'm Hayley Farrell, and I'm the Global Wellbeing Director at Arcadis, but also co-host with Peter for our UK Psych Health and Safety Podcast. Pete, tell me, where have you just come back from then? You're looking quite tanned.
Thank you. Well, I actually, I'm involved with the European Academy for Occupational Health Psychology, which represents psychologists across Europe and the world, and I'm on their executive. We had a meeting out in Granada, in Spain, to view the places where we're going to have the conference and the receptions, etc. So so I spent a few days out in Granada, and I'd never actually been to the Costa del Sol because I was flying back out of Malaga. So I dropped down to the Costa del Sol for a couple of days, and it was 29 degrees, and you can buy sangria for €1.25 for 1 litre. So sangria on the beach is an entirely different experience to sangria, in a bar or something. Absolutely. It's really harsh. It was really hard. Honestly, it was very hard.
You know what? I think, what are we, part-time travelers? Absolutely. Part-time travelers, part-time workers, you and I. I'm off on a cruise next week with my mum, which is something I'm looking forward to. And actually, our guest speaker and I were in Barcelona just a couple of weeks back. So we're all travelers on the call today.
We are well-being implementers. We implement our own well-being. That's what we do. And hopefully most of it's healthy. I would argue that the sangria, it does have fruit in it. So possibly, yeah.
One of your 5 a day, is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely oranges and apples were in there. So, marvelous. So anyway, I'm back to this harsh reality of life now. I've got to mow the lawn, do all that sort of stuff. Right, well, we could waffle on for ages, but I'm going to leave it to you, Hayley. Leave it to you now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pete. Well, I'm really pleased to introduce our guest speaker today. Dan Chan is with us, and Dan is the Global Workplace and Wellbeing Lead at dentsu International. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Hayley. Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. Thank you for being here with us. And listening to us ramble. So did you enjoy your extended stay in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, like I said, as you mentioned, Hayley, both of us were there at Barcelona for work, and then I extended my stay there for just the weekend, and I was really taken back by it, which is really beautiful, just really kind of quaint, and just had a couple of days just chilling. So yeah, it was good. I came back refreshed from it. And the weather was good as well. So that always makes a difference. But also kind of that weekend, I think the UK was having some even better weather than Spain. So, but no, it always makes a difference, doesn't it? Kind of when the sun's shining and things. But yeah, it was nice. It was just by the coast and beach. It was nice to walk along the beach and seafront. So yeah, it was a nice kind of restful couple of days after work.
Good to hear. Well, thank you so much. Do you want to just So as I introduced you, do you want to just give a little bit of a background of your current role, what you're up to, and just in terms of what you're doing at dentsu at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm the Global Workplace and Wellbeing Lead at dentsu. Dentsu, we're a global marketing and advertising agency. So, we build our advertising campaigns, the adverts you see on telly, and things like that, as well as supporting our clients. And I oversee 2 areas, really. Our future of work, which is looking at now our ways of working, so hybrid working, how that lands, our approach to that with all our different markets. But a large portion of my role is around employee well-being and building out that framework globally around that strategy, as well as programs to support those all in place as well. I've been at dentsu now for about a couple of years. So just over my 2-year mark with them, and it's an exciting place. So we're changing rapidly. So dentsu was originally a Japanese, I would say, headquartered company, which it still is, and then we also had international markets, which is headquartered in the UK. But the beginning of the year, we're now merging as one dentsu, so one whole entity, which is exciting for all of us, is we can not only support all of our clients across all of our 4 regions now, so Japan, Americas, EMEA and APAC, but really be true one big entity, one collaborative kind of company as well.
Amazing, Dan. I know you and I have spent many hours discussing this kind of role in a global space, and so I'm really excited to get into the thick of some of that with you today. My first question is, I know that you've got a clinical background, and I'd love to know about your interesting journey of how and specifically why you've moved into a wellbeing career.
Yeah, so I started my career off as a nurse, so working in the NHS originally, and I always say the reason why I went into nursing was because I wanted a profession that I felt I could truly make a difference and also help people. And I think, from the start, when I was deciding my career, those are two things that stuck in my head all the time. And none of my family come from a medical or health background, and it was just something I was drawn to it. And so then, we started my career in the NHS, working in accident and emergency around kind of north of so Sheffield, where I did my training, and then moving down to London, working in the A&Es across kind of across all over London really. I then, after a while, decided I fancied a bit of a change, so I went to more occupational health, and that's, I guess, where back then, I was talking a good few years ago, I guess you could say occupational health was a lot about health promotion, really. I was working with the business as well, in looking at ways we could still improve health, but also support business leaders, really keeping people in the office or in the working environment as well. And I worked for Transport for London for a few years doing that. I then went to work for Nomura, which is a Japanese investment bank, which you're probably wondering why. But do banks have health centres on site? Well, actually, London banks did at that time. And we were lucky enough that it was an in-house one. So during my time there, I oversaw our primary care centre, but also I worked with the business as well to really look at how health matters could affect not only our people, but also the business. And that time in back then in 2000 and I think it was 9. Back then, we were going through another epidemic, weren't we, with the swine flu epidemic, which some of you may remember. And that really kind of, made me think, gosh, I could use my health knowledge here to really support a business, because you had to think about how the impact of that could affect not only people, returning who may have flu-like symptoms, but also how that affected the business as well. And because we fell under the HR umbrella then as well, I was able to support the HR umbrella, kind of looking at our medical claims and things. And that really then, gave me kind of the outlook of I could use my health in other ways to support businesses from not only a commercial perspective, but also an internal perspective as well. And then looking on that, I then moved to Hong Kong, where I worked in more of a consulting capacity, working with insurers, but also brokers, and working with our clients around their health and well-being, really, and developing those strategies and frameworks. And that's what then really got me more into this side of well-being. But I think that strand that was coming through, and why I'm doing well-being now, is that always that thought around what can I do to help people and what can I do to make a difference. And I think using that business knowledge to do that is really drives me to what I'm doing today.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And I think Pete and I it's lovely to have a guest who lives and breathes the same values about make a difference and about the long-term impact for our people. So that's really great. Thank you. Pete.
Yeah, it's amazing, Dan, how lives align. I was a nurse, then I a psyche nurse, and then I went into psychology, was doing clinical neuropsychology, and was asked about neuropsychological effects in people in work, and that's how I ended up doing stress. But not because of the neuropsychological effects, it's just been interesting. It's an interesting journey, and I always think, if people come into the profession because it's vocationally driven, and with it comes loads of burdens and loads of senses of injustice if things aren't going right. But what I'd really like to know, because obviously you've had a vast career in many different markets, is that what do you think the business case for investment in employee health and well-being is?
Oh, I think when the real true business case is linking it back to performance, really, and also kind of the outcomes of well-being what it can have. I think when we look at that business case, we look at things like attrition, don't we? The cost, in terms of healthcare costs, etc. All things like presenteeism as well, and those all link back to well-being. I think if we're happier, healthier, we have good well-being, that only contributes to more productivity, more engagement in the workplace, and that that will then lead to kind of better profits overall. So I know on a wider kind of thought, that's where the business case should lie. However, I always think when you're looking at your business case, you need to look at what it is you're trying to identify and what the needs are of your own business. Not just link it to those why kind of categories I just said. You need to really look at kind of what it is you want to solve and what those outcomes are for you as a business as well. And I think the key thing is data. Really looking at your data and kind of really discovering what all those kind of issues are as well. Like we said, for example, if we take kind of high attrition levels, not all companies have high attrition levels. So there's no point in looking at frameworks around that to put in as if your company is not seeing that. However, if you're seeing high stress, then you can look at kind of strategies to put in place that. And I think when you look at that business cases and translating that back to your senior leaders, what those key outcomes can do for not only as your business as a whole, but also kind of your people and also kind of your value proposition.
Yeah, I mean that is so true. If I may ask you an additional question as part of that, very early on, about 15 years ago, I was involved with a company in the city. And they'd had a claim, and I went, and it was a substantial claim. And I went back to them and I said, "Well, that's a lot of money." And they said, "Well, it is, Peter, but the important thing here is it's the brand. So the brand has been impacted. So do you think, actually? I mean, I've always felt that the brand is an argument where we've not really looked at and really put emphasis into, is if you want the best people to work with you, then you have to have an environment that keeps them happy, and or even not even happy, maybe just healthy. So do you think that is a useful mechanism when talking about the kind of things we do?
Yeah, definitely. And I sit in the employee experience global team, and that's one thing we do. Like we look at EVP, our employee value proposition, but also our employer brand as well. And within that, we're weaving in well-being into everything we do, because I think that's intrinsic to it. And kind of as you draw in new talent, we're seeing people asking kind of, how do you really support well-being? And it's not just around the programs you have in place. It's all about that culture, isn't it? Kind of that flexibility, choice, and belonging. So I definitely think now we're moving away towards that and looking at kind of, what does your company feel like? And what does your company look like to a person from the outside? And what does that whole brand really look like? And like we said, we work in marketing, don't we? So dentsu work in marketing. So we understand that kind of, the importance of branding, the importance of that marketing and that key messaging. So that's something that we really try to focus on around the whole EVP and around kind of well-being.
I think, Dan, to expand on that, just because I think this is such an interesting topic, Pete, that you've kind of raised. But the other thing is, I mean, brand, reputation, we've kind of covered, but also in a global space, Dan, you'll probably be able to relate to this as well, is we don't speak, I don't think, in the UK market enough about human rights, but in a global space, we speak a lot about human rights and we speak a lot about ethics. I think, especially in countries that are less mature or less developed countries, it's the basics of human rights, isn't it? It's a safe, healthy workplace, which feeds into our world of well-being. And I'm seeing we're definitely building our employee value proposition on the human rights element as the foundation for well-being, and then diversity, equality, and inclusion as well. But all underpinned by that, what's right for people, and are we an ethical business as well? So I think brand reputation is definitely, Pete, something maybe that's untapped potentially in the UK market. I'm not so sure on a global market, because I think reputation and branding and EVP is something that we're expanding for employee retention and attraction of top talent when there's scarcity as well. But for me, it's about bringing it all together in a concise way to deliver it to the audience, whether that be the senior leadership team or your employees on the ground. You know, it's demonstrating that everything we're doing, not just in the well-being space, but within the business, is aligned.
Yeah, and in this particular organisation, it was the catalyst for a major investment in a health and wellbeing program, which was centred around the people. And they have won awards. They won. So they won awards for that involvement. But it was such an argument that I sat back afterwards and I thought, when they said, you know what, our business is about making profit. And if the message gets out, we don't look after our people, we don't get the best people. That was the other element to it. And I was like, okay, I hadn't thought about it in that context. But then we had this wider conversation about this whole idea, the whole concept of branding. So yeah, it's Hayley, that's a whole podcast on its own, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely.
We could have some fun with that.
But I think just touching on that quickly, we're seeing more people ask around well-being and not well-being, D&I, leadership, etc., kind of on our interviews. And it's our younger generations that are really pushing this, like our Gen Zs. And if it doesn't fit in within their own values, they won't join a company. So that employer brand, or kind of your company brand, is so important to not only attract key diverse talent, but also retain talent as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. That is what you're seeing after lockdown.
Yeah,
people aren't accepting the status quo, are they, Hayley? They want something different. They want something that reflects their personal things. So I just wish I could work out what generation. I'm 56. What generation does that make me? So if someone is listening to this podcast, can you please drop me a note on LinkedIn? Because I struggle to. I don't know if I'm Z, Y, or what. A baby boomer. I have no idea.
I think you might be. Oh, I don't know. Should I go?
I don't want to be a baby boomer. I think I'm too.
You might be a baby boomer, Pete. But
oh my God.
That's great.
Well, listen, Hayley, I'm just going to mute myself now. We're not having this conversation.
Dan, so I think a couple of weeks back we were on a panel together as well at the water cooler, which was amazing. And we spoke about psychological safety, but then we also spoke about psychological health and safety. And obviously, Pete and I are here to talk and promote that psychological health and safety risk-based approach. But as a global well-being lead, I'd love to hear from you around what psychological health and safety means to you and to you at dentsu, and why it's important.
Yeah, I think when we look at psychological health and safety, it's really looking at all those risks that really can affect a person, from workloads, demands, the pressures of a job, to things like job security and insecurity as well. And look, things and organizational changes which dentsu is going through huge at the moment. But it's it's internal things like your communications. Are they clear? Are they transparent? And all this weaves into not only kind of increasing poor mental health and anxiety, but also our well-being overall as well. So I think that's the really crux of it, isn't it? Kind of that's what kind of the importance of psychological health and safety is within an organization. Now, I know kind of depending kind of the industries you're in, the levels and degrees of how you measure it, kind of what you need to do to, achieve good psychological health and safety is different. But I guess for us, it is like, because we are kind of a typical kind of, office environment, white collar, is looking around kind of those workloads and demands and transparency, etc. I know kind of on our panel, we talked about that. And also on our panel, we talked about kind of the difference between psychological health and safety and psychological safety. And, I guess kind of from a psychological safety point of view, and I'm going to use the word bringing your whole self to work. And I know that term is used quite openly all the time, but I think it's about coming to work and being you as much as you want to be you. Without the fear of, having any negative consequences or being able to speak up about concerns, but also knowing that you might be criticized, you might kind of also have kind of, tough conversations. And I always say this, I think psychological safety is not always about being nice. I think we can always think, it's about being nice to everybody, isn't it? And it's not about that. As leaders, we're going to have performance kind of reviews. We're going to have to look at tough conversations and have those tough conversations. And that all comes in with about having those open, safe cultures and, environments.
So many golden nuggets there. And so many times I was, I'm hearing more and more, and I think it's a good thing around bring your whole self to work. But as much as you want to bring to work, I think, there is an element of needing to make people feel comfortable to bring as much as they feel like they want to show. But that other piece around, it's not about being nice. It's about building trust. And trust isn't just about being nice. It's about being honest, isn't it? In the same way we are with our friends, with our family. I don't know. I remember getting frustrated with my mom when I'd put on a dress when I was a little girl, and she'd be like, "You look lovely. You could wear a black sack." And I was like, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear the truth. I don't want to just be, and I know that's a very small part of it, but it's about that very, I think, straightforward environment where everybody can feel like their voice can be heard, regardless of whether it's uncomfortable or not.
I think that's a hard thing, isn't it? I think kind of, we're always brought up and told you need to be nice to people, don't you? I don't know, that's what my mum and, my parents said, that you don't want to be nasty. It's not very nice to be like this. You need to be nice to people. And I think we forget when you get into the work environment, you're mixing the same different people. It's not always about that. And, the right or wrong, you need to have kind of spaces where we can openly discuss, bad performance, be criticized, but also take that as like good feedback, I think, as well. And use that to our advantage as well, because that's the only way we're going to grow.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to confirm for the listeners, I am Generation X by 2 years. So I am happy that I am Generation X, like peace and love and everything else. Like you won't see it because you're obviously on an audio, but I'm giving myself the big peace sign. So yeah, I mean, it is so true that, and then what we're talking about here is different from psychological safety. And I think, actually, And I think that's really important, because the borders of what we said could sound like psychological safe, but it isn't that. It is actually what we're creating is the right environment for people to flourish and people to survive. As it sounds very dramatic, but one of the things as 26 years as a regulator is you realize what really poor environments do to people's mental and physical health and what the outputs and outcomes can be. And thriving is really, really important. That we need to encourage people to thrive in the environments that they're in. Right, I'm just going to go for a really easy question here now. For global organizations, culture often varies considerably between countries. How are you creating a coherent company culture that also includes everyone? Good luck on that one.
You said it's an easy one. This is really difficult, because I think when you look at, and looking from experience as well, when I used to live in Hong Kong, when I used to work around Asia Pacific, consulting around well-being, every single market has a different culture and with different journeys around kind of not only their understanding around well-being and mental health and just health in general, but the way they access care. The way work environments are set up. So you look in Asia, typically work days are much longer than most of our kind of other markets, like kind of within EMEA in kind of in Americas, for example. So when you look at all that, it's really, really hard. But one thing that we are trying to do is, like I said, is like creating that kind of that EVP, is have a clear message and a clear defined message around kind of your mission statement or your goal, or with well-being, what does that mean within the company? So what we did was we created a clear message. So again, we wanted our people to thrive, we wanted people to make meaningful contributions and connections, and all of that links into good well-being. We then created some high-level principles globally that kind of looked upon kind of our approach, looked at kind of what it meant from us as a business point of view and what we're kind of trying to achieve. That could then filter down into our markets as well. But I think the big thing around all this is you need to empower the market to then take those key messages, those key principles, to then develop them and adapt them into ways that suit their own cultural, their cultural differences and allow for those nuances, because it's not a one size fits all. And I've seen kind of, we work in previous jobs, kind of, there's a big global push to everybody to follow the same, and that doesn't work. So it's really empowering in the market. So whenever we do anything, it is really allowing them to take those key messages, take those assets, and then really develop them in kind of use them in ways that kind of fits them. But it's always about meeting them where they are. So, like, for example, we have mental health first aids in the business, but we know we can't roll out that truly across all our different markets because they're not ready for it. And that may be for different reasons. So it may be down to their roadmaps. It may be down to the fact that, they don't have the resources in place to support programs like that, or just maybe down to they don't have the understanding or that foundational layer around mental health and well-being, and that's what you need to work on first. So it's about meeting them where they are with all these different elements, and then working with them to build on top of that. So I think that's really where it starts with that culture piece for us, and for me it's just high level kind of messaging to create that my own brand around well-being. So whenever I talk about this in the business, people know me and my brand around well-being. And then there's key principles, and then allowing really your markets to really, I say, run with it really, but supporting them along the way. And I guess one thing I've been trying to do is educate people on, mental health, well-being, workplace, just allows them to understand that kind of the importance of it, and getting that awareness out. I think, like we all know, kind of that's the hardest thing, isn't it? Just you've got to have that constant drum beat around kind of, why we need to do it, the importance of it, but the benefits of it. And where possible, I try to bring examples to life, use real people within the business to get their kind of views, comments, talk to them, kind of, bring kind of what they're feeling, and bring that to kind of our senior leaders so they really kind of get that kind of message across, and hopefully that then, all feeds into that wider culture piece.
Yeah, it is really true. I know when we've developed mental health strategies and we've developed in the UK, and then we say, well, let's take it to an EMA country, you've got to adapt it. I worked in the Middle East, so understanding the cultural significance of religion is really important in that context. Inshallah. So in messaging in that, are you bringing, and from what I can see, you're bringing in local contacts and local people to help form and the delivery of those messages? Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have some key messages, and then we have so whenever we do campaigns or things, we work with our global communications teams, and we'll create high level assets for them, key messagings for them to take away, then to either translate so it lands better, or else kind of use in ways that kind of they can then build it into their comms as well. So where possible, we always allow for that, because we know it's not, some words don't translate in English as well to other languages, or they don't exist. And that's a difficult thing, isn't it? I think when we're working in global roles, we can forget that. But that's something kind of always have in mind. Is all around those cultural nuances, and I think that's really come from working, abroad as well. It's really kind of given me that mindset.
Yeah, because actually there's two types of culture, isn't there? There's the culture of the organization, which is what often gets wrapped up. We talk about the culture of the organization, but then we don't contextualize that with the culture that organization is existing in, and what that actually means. And even internally, I remember when I worked with the foundry sector, it's a predominantly male organization. Now, I couldn't go in there and talk to them about primary, secondary, and tertiary. I had to go in there and talk to them on a very practical level about what mental health was. And to do that, I had to understand how they think and spend time in the foundries, which is what I did. So even within cultures like we have in the UK, there are other work cultures that exist because of the nature of the cohort of people there. But it is fascinating. Another subject for a podcast. But, we're just like two sponges, aren't we, Kaylee? We just sort of like absorb ideas and go, "Oh, that'd be fascinating to explore." So
keeping your list in order.
Yes.
Add it to the list.
Add it to the list. But yeah, thank you for that answer. I'm going to have to ask you a more difficult question next time, because that was way too easy for you to answer.
I do find that exploring, how we bring everybody on the journey in a global organization, especially in our world of well-being and psychological health and safety. And I think, like you said, Pete, frameworks might be developed in the UK because the UK is quite mature. I mean, Australia as well, because they've got regulations around this kind of stuff. But even within the UK, there's subcultures. We've got many diverse people from many ethnicity and heritages living in the UK. And I think we sometimes overlook that in terms of expecting everybody to sing off the same hymn sheet, but they've got differences, if that makes sense. And it's about trying to make it work for everybody. So no, fascinating discussion. Dan, so coming back into the UK context, and I know that, we often say we're global thinkers. We need to think about how this adapts to everybody. But I'd like specifically to focus just on the UK for this question around predictions for well-being in the UK over the next 5 years. Where do you see, it could be 10 years. Where do you see this landing? And do you think it's going to stay where it is or change itself up over the next couple of years, I suppose?
I think it's going to get easier, these questions.
Be the oracle.
This landscape has changed so rapidly over the past 2 years since, like, pre-pandemic. It is so difficult to kind of keep up. I think if you asked this question, say 5 years ago, I'd probably be able to tell you kind of what the predictions are. But just over the past couple of years, it has just changed. I think, especially for the UK, I think if we look at it from a health perspective, though, I think we're going to see a big push around more, I'd say, preventative care and around screening. We're already seeing that at the moment. There's been new campaigns around I just read in the news recently about over 40s having access to health screening to pick up kind of chronic kind of diseases, but also critical illnesses, and also looking at kind of lung cancer as well. They're rolling out another campaign around screening for lung cancer as well. So I think we'll see a bigger influx of that around that piece, because I think we know kind of catching these diseases or catching these conditions before they become too chronic is not only better for the economy, environment, but also reduces that load on the NHS, which is what we're seeing. So I think from a health perspective, that's where we see, but also I think we're seeing kind of adoption of technology, but I think that's only going to rise as well. And I think things like telehealth, telemedicine, access to care will become a lot more accessible, because we need to take that burden off the NHS, really, don't we, through privatized care of some sort. So I think that's where we see that. When we look at well-being, and I think particularly kind of around perhaps how that fits into the workplace, I think financial well-being is going to get a big push. I think much like mental health was 5-10 years ago, that's where financial well-being is now, as we don't really talk about it that well. And I think just given what we're going through as the cost of living crisis that we're seeing in the UK, I think there'd be a bigger push around that, not only around kind of support, but also financial literacy. And I think that probably will need to start within schools. And I'm sure kind of, I was never taught about how to save. I was never taught about kind of budgeting. The first time I ever saw money was my first paycheck, and I went out and spent it, and things and all that. And I think we're seeing repercussions of that now, and I think that's where we're having a bigger focus. I think probably we'll see a bigger focus on that. But also when we look at, for me, which is why I hope wellbeing goes, it's about how companies think about those organizational elements of wellbeing and how they affect the bigger picture. So that's what I would love to see kind of wellbeing going in the next 5 years, how things like I said, that work-life balance, that organization around leaders, kind of, transparency, etc. Like we just talked about, kind of psychological health and safety, that really needs to be brought into the workplace as a whole, and then to be assessed fully, because I think that's when you're really, really kind of tackle well-being, and that's where I would love to see well-being in 5 years' time. We know we have programs in place. We know we have kind of initiatives which are all great. We couldn't do our jobs without those. But I always say they're on the peripheral. What you need to really look at is that target, that root cause. So yeah, hopefully in 5 years' time, Pete, Hayley, we're doing that.
Woohoo! Standing ovation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and isn't it interesting how we've renamed recession cost of living? But there's another conversation.
So many podcasts to come.
We're not in a recession. We're in a cost of living crisis. It looks a lot like a recession. Could be a recession. Will be a recession in the UK in the next couple of months. Which was why financial well-being is important. Yeah. Because when we come to work, and this is particularly as a regulator, when we come to work, we bring ourselves. And if we're coming to work and we've got worries and we've got concerns, and our attention is deferred to away from the activities that we're doing, and that in some instance that can lead to people making the wrong decision or forgetting to do something, which has dramatic effects. So I think for me, that's why I'm so passionate about psych health and safety. I on a real world basis, I've seen what happens when people are not 100%, or even when they're at a lower percentage, and they're not really thinking about what's happening around them. So yeah, financial well-being will be there as well as the physical, and there's still a lot of inactivity on mental health, on stress. It is preventable. It's part of the legislation. So I'd like to see more people go, let's do this stuff that the World Health Organization now talks about. Prevent, promote, and protect, and support. And the biggest thing where well-being and health sit is in the promote and protect. Because if we put the right workplaces activities in there, things that we can do in the workplace that protect people from mental ill health, but also prevent them from requiring to go, and the prevention element of looking at systems of work. Got it. Hyde Park moment again. Hayley, I'm really sorry. I just feel relaxed after my holiday. I've come back really energized. But then, which leads me really to the last question, okay? And this is one takeaway for the audience that you would like them to take from this podcast, amongst the many nuggets that we've already given them. One takeaway, and if you could tell us that would be amazing.
I think the one big thing, if I can get across, is just time. Take the time and the moment to really assess your needs and kind of look at what you can do to support those better. I think we're in a great space at the moment just to pause and reflect. We're all back to our busy BAU lives, aren't we, after the pandemic? And we had 2 years of being able to sit back and reflect on things and look at things with a different outlook and perspective. And we've quickly forgotten that. And we're seeing now repercussions of everything we're doing kind of, within the workplace. So if anything at all, take the time out, take the time you need to think about kind of what works best for you, what works best for your company, but what works best for people, because we have a great opportunity to change things in the future, but we can only do that if we kind of, stop and pause.
Absolutely, Dan. I think I couldn't agree with you more about the fact that, and I've been reflecting on this, we did have 2 years of the pandemic, but did we all just survive during that stage? And although we tried to reflect, we did somewhat, but as soon as we come out of survival mode, it's back to doing mode, and I agree with you. I keep saying that we need to stop, and we also need to do a needs assessment based on the wider organization, not just from a well-being lens. It's about what's going to make the biggest impact for our people overall. So couldn't agree more. Pause, time, needs assessment. Great nuggets. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Needs assessment. I was buzzing. That's my as an ex-regulator, do those assessments.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Dan, thank you so much for, honestly, one of the greatest chats in the last 45 minutes. It's really been insightful and just a pleasure to have you as a fellow advocate in the space around systemic change. Thank you.
And thank you for having me on. It's been great this morning.
It really, really has. And we're, 45 minutes closer to the weekend for us who are busy recording this. It is Friday, nearly afternoon. So have a wonderful weekend, Dan and Pete. I'm logging off after this for a week off, which is exciting. But to all of our listeners, thank you for being here. As always, please do download the podcast episode on either Spotify or you can get it on Apple. And I believe you can also watch us on YouTube. So do give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a subscribe, and we hope you enjoy it. But also do connect with Dan. I'm sure Dan would welcome any connections on LinkedIn, myself and Pete as well. And we look forward to hearing your feedback and speaking to you all again soon. Thanks, Dan. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.